difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Here with the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Monday. Happy Monday, everyone. Start your work week, middle of your work week, whatever it is. But we've got, I don't want to say depressing, but realistic look at what's going on in the Supreme Court and nominations and why maybe you should just take a deep breath and calm down, because there are things that you personally can do that have nothing to do with the president, the Trump nominations, anything like that, but you actually hold the power. And this is part of an ongoing theme about stop waiting for a hero, look in the mirror. You have the power to do a lot. And we'll go through it today. So before we get started, let's check in with our Canadian co-host, Andy Kennedy. Hi, Andy.
Oh, how are you this morning?
Oh, fired up. I'm fired up. Yeah.
I'm reasonably calm. I had an interesting exchange. I thought I'd set the record straight on Facebook of some people that were confused about Canadian bacon and real bacon and moose, and and this all came from a tweet from someone who was mad at a person they were arguing with from Canada. So, basically went off and said, moose fucker with shitty bacon, that kind of, the typical Canadian tropes, right? And kind of fired back and it's interesting. I just want to make sure that people understand that the thing that you call Canadian bacon, we don't call it that.
What do you call it?
We call it pea-meal bacon. And it's not back bacon like Bob and Doug McKenzie called it. It's just pea-meal, right? And it's, the backbone of Eggs Benny, right?
Yeah.
And the Egg McMuffin in the U.S. Let's not forget. The Canadian bacon is a American term, right? Oh, the other thing he said that was curling was boring.
Curling is not boring, especially the curling with cats. I love that. That is amazing.
See, curling to watch is boring. Curling to play is actually quite fun because, in fact, at the venue, right? Well, first of all, anybody can do it, right? It's certainly not a strenuous exercise. It's as strenuous as you want it to be. But typically at the arena where it's held, you can get booze, right? So that makes anything exciting.
Well, it's just bocce on ice. And if you can stay right side up and not fall on your butt, which I tried broomball for a while, which is hockey with, it's hockey with tennis shoes on ice, and I was not good at it. But
see, it's the kind of thing where, how in the Coyote or the Coyote Roadrunner thing, where before they got started, their legs started going for a few seconds, and then that's like the real life version of that, right? Because you can't get any traction. So again, it's more fun to play than watch. But these are all things that are really fun and cool. But I just love it when Americans explain to Canadians what our country is like. I was really hoping for the wait times for healthcare thing to come around, but sadly it didn't. But
somebody tried to mansplain your country.
By the way, I wanted to mention I'm wearing this shirt because I was called a soft middle-aged hippie. So instead of pushing back, I decided to own it.
Own it. Absolutely. So mansplaining is a real thing, and people need to stop it. So
I actually described it in that thread as Amerisplaining.
That's perfect. And arrogant Americans, we'll try it. We'll try it. So before we get started this morning, I just want to remind everybody that we are live. And if you type a comment, complaint, critique, any of that into the chat windows, particularly on our Facebook page, Digital Liberation Front Live, or on our Twitter, we will see those comments. So we invite you to join the conversation. Tell us where we're wrong. And yeah, all of that. So, Andy, you ready?
Tell us where we're wrong, but remember, it's only an hour show.
Right. Keep your critiques short. So, Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, and may she rest in peace. So,
by the way, I wanted to briefly explain that had to be explained to me, the RBG.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because of my video editing, I thought that was, red.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's her initials. So
I said, we're getting rid of color. Just died. I don't.
Yeah, as a Canadian, yeah, I can see that. Well, and most people, but so she had an amazing career, and I saw the documentary. I haven't seen the movie. I saw the documentary, and I thought it was extraordinarily well done. And let me preface it and say, her life and struggle was an amazing story. And she herself was a very strong fighter for the things that she cared most about. And we commend her as a fierce warrior and an advocate for LGBTQ and women's reproductive rights. Having said that.
Disclaimer over.
Right. She's just a person, just like the rest of us, and I think that we run into issues when we elevate a person above others. Like okay, in a eulogy, absolutely, you do that. You never speak ill of the dead. But when we start to put people on a pedestal that maybe isn't accurate, what we actually do is run the risk of misrepresenting what that person's life work was and opening the door to having everything that they've done being torn down because we ourselves set up a wrong narrative. Okay? So she was not a champion for animal rights or something like that. And if we try to elevate her to that and then we find out later that that's wrong, then we risk her entire career. So let's not put her in a place that was not rightfully earned. Okay? All right? So that's all I want to say about that.
Yeah, well, we need to look at the history of the person. Right? We need to realize these are all people with their belief system, that the narrative that we get from the neoliberal mainstream is not as black and white as you would think, that the left-leaning judges all vote in one way and all the right-leaning judges all vote in one way. We have to remember that these are all people that came up through the justice system, that their lives are shaped by their life experiences, and everybody has a different one. And, you look at the person and their body of work individually and not just put it into a neat little box.
Right, exactly. So real quick, good morning to the mics. We have two mics, Mike Tyler, Mike Patino. Good morning.
Usually we just have two turntables.
Right, exactly. So good morning to you. But yeah, Andy, to your point, you're absolutely correct. And then how many attorneys have we had on here who talked about the laws about what is, not what it should be? And in terms of the lay public, when we talk about a liberal justice, we have certain expectations about the way that they will side on a case. And that's just not accurate. And we're going to go through some of that. So that while we have this court with an open vacancy due to her passing, it opens up a conversation that I think we need to have adequately grounded. Okay, so for example, let's start with Trump himself. So I'm going to put this up here because we know that this is an issue. Trump was bragging about how he's broken every record on appointment of judges, and he was talking about having appointed 187 judges. Now, what's interesting about this is he can nominate federal judges, but that's pretty much where it ends for the White House. The rest of it has to go through the Senate. The Senate has to have their confirmation hearings, and the Senate is the one that either votes to have someone put in place as a judge, a federal judge, or they don't. So 187 times there was bipartisan support. That means Democrats and Republicans agreed to Trump's judicial appointments. Now remember, Trump came into office with over 100 open seats. Those were 100 seats that the Obama administration forwarded nominees for, or in some cases didn't, and their nominee was not installed through bipartisan support. But Trump himself has had that support, and where does that come from? That comes from senators, right? Those are your people in the Senate. So there were Democrats who said, yeah, come on in. And that was with federal judges in the court just below the Supreme Court. So the way this works, and I'm going to butcher this, so if you're an attorney watching this morning, chime on and correct me, but when a case is making its way through the courts, it goes to the first level and then the second level and then might get to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court is hearing cases that have already been heard in a federal court. And whatever the ruling was on that case, the plaintiffs or the defendants decide that they don't like that ruling and they try to get it heard by the Supreme Court. So all of these cases that go before the Supreme Court have already been heard by these federal judges, the judges that Trump is getting appointed and installed in federal courts. So sit with that for a second. Who has more power here? The very few cases that go to the Supreme Court that they decide they're going to hear, or those layers below?
That set the precedent for the cases that is taken into consideration by the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like,
yep.
And I know you love it when I bring up baseball analogies, so
Okay,
I'm going to do that now. Right? So have a drink of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
When they brought instant replay into baseball, right? They didn't want to hamstring umpires and take away their jobs, right? But they allowed a certain number of challenges from the opposite team if they thought that the umpire made a mistake. Well, the rule is that there must be irrefutable evidence on replay that the umpire made the mistake before it can be overturned, right? So it's not set in stone that when a challenge happens, that it's actually going to be overturned. So that's a good analogy for what our court systems are like, or what the Canadian court systems are pretty much the exact same. But it's precedent setting through the courts as they go up, right? But when it finally gets to the Supreme Court, they've got their life experiences that they base their own decisions on. But for the most part, and this is the vast majority of judges, it is by rule of law, more so than personal choice. And if you ask any of the judges, they will say, well, what's the law?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. So in this context, yes, a Supreme Court justice is important, but we're gonna go through all of the layers that matter, in my opinion, a little bit more than the Supreme Court justice. The marriage equality and Roe versus Wade notwithstanding, those were those cases still are being litigated in the lower courts. Death by 1,000 cuts. As a baker, do I have to compromise my rights to make a cake for a gay wedding? All of those things are challenging it at the Supreme Court. If you want that law to stand, change the law, right? So you don't have to wait for the Supreme Court. And you can see this with reproductive rights throughout the states, where they're cutting back on abortion clinics. Like, there are none in Louisiana, 0 in Louisiana. So Louisiana has effectively litigated Roe versus Wade by making laws in their state that prohibit abortion. Do you see the difference here? So we can depend on the 9 justices to make the laws for the nation, or at a state level, we can write those laws to govern our state and not have to worry about what happens with the Supreme Court justice. And, oh, by the way, your vote matters, especially for senators, because the senators are the ones who vote for Supreme Court justice. So there are many ways to come about this, and I think Republicans have done an excellent job of looking at the landscape and cutting us off at the knees because they understood this. And I fault the Democratic Party and liberals in particular for not teaching these basic principles to the electorate so that we understand, wow, we actually do hold the power. So there are a couple of races right now that have the potential to flip the Senate blue, not just blue, but progressive blue. And, we had Dan Whitfield, who is running in Arkansas against Tom Cotton, a literal fascist Nazi Tom Cotton. And you have Dan Whitfield running against him. Why aren't Democrats helping him? That's a Senate race. If you care about what happens in the Supreme Court, you should be looking at the Senate races. Okay? So that's one of it. So the other thing that kind of hit the news, and I'm personally so over Bob Woodward right now, but he's already releasing audio of his conversations with Trump and comments about the Supreme Court and Judicial. So this is a really short audio clip from CNN interview from Wolf Blitzer and the Situation Room. So I'm going to see if I can get this to play. So this is just the audio. Hopefully this works. Here we go.
Thanks very much for being with us, author of Rage. So, Bob, during your interviews with President Trump for your book, you spoke with him about the judiciary and the Supreme Court, and I want to start just playing a part of the conversation you had with him back on January 22nd.
I just signed my 187th federal judge. It's a record. 187 judges in less than 3 years, Bob. And 2 Supreme Court judges, never been done before. The only one that has a better percentage is George Washington, because he appointed 100%. But my percentage is, like ridiculous. And there were a couple of those. I'll end up with, when I get out, I'll probably have more than 50% of the federal judges in the country appointed under Trump.
And Lindsey Graham has said that there were a couple of those judges that he himself didn't care for and rejected them. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I know who senators say, yeah. And when they don't like him, I don't put him in. I don't want that.
Does he have kind of, because, that's his committee and they...
Yeah, no, if Lindsey and other people don't like him, I don't put him in. You know why? Why do we want to book the system? They don't like him because they may be, in some cases, they're not conservative or they don't believe, or they came out with a couple of bad decisions on something.
And it's interesting, Lindsey Graham is worried that the judiciary is going to become too partisan. Do you agree with that? Do you worry
Well,
about
it depends. Yeah, it's very partisan right now, basically. It's always a party vote. Look, the whole country right now is a partisan vote.
Okay. So when Trump said it's always a partisan vote, no, it's not. It is absolutely not. So one of those things, and I'm going to post these links right here so everybody can follow along and tell me where I'm absolutely wrong. But one of my favorite go-to sources to cut the rhetoric when it comes to the way the Supreme Court runs is something called the SCOTUS blog. That is SCOTUSblog.com. And this is managed by a couple people, attorneys, who have sometimes argued cases and filed amicus briefs and all sorts of things with the Supreme Court. And they kind of watch what's going on, what's on the docket, what the rulings were. And they even keep these really awesome stats about how the justices rule, who writes the majority, who writes the dissent opinion, all of these things. So I went out because Trump said, you know, it's very partisan, blah, blah. I'm like, is that true? According to the SCOTUS blog, no, it's not. And this is part of where if you're an RBG fan, you're going to be really upset with me. Because we need to talk about why it's not partisan and why there's definitely a myth about liberal justices and how they rule. So if you have concern about marriage equality or women's reproductive rights, of course, those are the issues that you're going to key into. But you're missing a lot of cases that are already on the docket coming up, have already been ruled, and all of these are cataloged on the SCOTUS blog. And so there were a couple of cases that I thought were pretty interesting. So there's this really nice chart, and it tells you who the litigants are. So among those cases are something from IBM, Comcast has a couple things, and you can just click on it and read the synopsis of what the complaint is. So there's always a complaint about IBM wants to do X, Y, and Z, and someone is suing them to say no. So you can read the synopsis before the ruling. You can read the arguments made before the Supreme Court. And right now, the Supreme Court is not meeting in person. So the journalists petitioned the Supreme Court to make those arguments and cases still open and virtual, so you can participate in that. So when we're talking about, all right, there's just so much. In that audio,
breathe, Karen.
yeah,
breathe.
there's just, and this is why I was fired up this morning, because I'm like, ugh. So in that audio clip with Trump, and he was talking about Lindsey Graham being upset about some of the justices. Here's what I want you to notice. In the corporate media, they're going to start putting out all of these pieces, like Claire McCaskill is my favorite one. They always say that Claire, who's a Republican, she comes out with a statement and says, I'm not going to side with my party on this. I'm not going to do, and she gets a whole lot of media attention. And then what does she do? She votes right along party lines, even though she just said she wasn't. And this is not the first time that Claire McCaskill has done this. This is like the fourth in the last 2.5 years. So to me, Claire is literally Lucy with the football. I swear to you, Chuck, I'm going to hold the ball. Don't worry about it. Go ahead and kick it. She's done it 4 times. So anytime Claire says, I'm not going to do, don't pay attention to it. And Lindsay's another one. Lindsay, who will do his pearl clutching, Lady G, I'm not buying it. So I just want to put that out there. It just drives me nuts whenever they get media attention.
Well, it's like Rand Paul, right?
Yeah.
I don't know about this. I'm going to hold out.
You're not.
Because there's about a 36-hour window that I can be the star.
Yeah, and that's exactly, I wonder if they now have acting coaches that help them, because they're getting so good at putting out this bait and switch narrative that they do. So, yeah, that's not it. So there were a couple things on the SCOTUS blog that I thought were pretty interesting. And this is where your vote in an election matters. And once again, I've said it before, my personal opinion is I don't give a damn who you vote for at the top of that ticket. For those of you who are not going to vote, I need you to pay attention. Skip that race if you have to. Every race down below is so important, and here's why. So this was under the SCOTUS blog. So most people may not be aware of this, but the Affordable Care Act is going before the Supreme Court yet again. And if we don't fill the vacancy, then it becomes a 4-4 court and it gets remanded back to the federal court, which would help to dismantle the ACA as we know it by the non-discrimination policy. So what this means is religious rights would supersede the rights of the employees. So ACA would be gutted yet again. And this includes the protections for pre-existing conditions. So you talk about a whole lot of people who would be really affected by this. So what's going on is they're on Thursday, September 24th at 12:30 Eastern Time. The Constitution Society is hosting a virtual review of this case. And I did post a link where you can sign up and read about what the arguments are for and against. So again, this is where the federal judges at those levels actually matter more than the Supreme Court in this case, because if we don't fill that seat, or we fill that seat with somebody who hates the ACA, or you know, we'll go by rule of law for the commerce, you're going to lose the ACA. So that's kind of a big deal. So maybe you register for that, take a listen. I know I will be. If you don't have time, I'll give the cliff notes. So that's something that's really important. The other case, Andy, you and I talked about this briefly. This one I thought was interesting. This is, well, not that one. Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, the Financial Oversight and Management Board for Puerto Rico. So this was Rico versus Aurelius Investments, LLC. So this was a case where all of the liberal justices, or so-called liberal justices, sided with the conservative justices and ruled on the way that the law is, not as it should be. And they went with against the people of Puerto Rico, who are Americans, to install investment bankers to oversee Puerto Rican debt. So the basis of this case was Puerto Rico has a representative, and we had Juan on last week to kind of talk about how they don't have a vote in Congress, but they do have a representative. So what this case was to supersede and overrule that representative and install Aurelius Investments and this board to decide the financials for Puerto Rico, not the people. So they just, you talk about taxation and law without representation. This was a case that did that. And I want you to notice there, the vote was 9-0. All of them ruled in favor of the corporation against the people of Puerto Rico. That's a big deal. So yeah.
And it's another dildo up the butt of the colony that pretends that the America cares about.
Right. Yeah, and so this whole idea, if you go out there and you look at the rulings, there's no Santa Claus, there is no Easter Bunny, and there are no liberal or conservative justices.
No tooth fairy?
No, there isn't. So I need people to really start paying attention to this, aside from those issues that just affect you. So for example, I have no intention of having children. So why should I give a damn about women's reproductive rights? If I take that position, does that make me a bad person? Well, isn't that the same as, the liberal white not really, yeah, like, Rome had it. Why would I protest Black Lives Matter under Biden? I wouldn't need to protest under Biden. It's that kind of myopic thinking where we're all segmented into the issues that only affect me, not all of us, where we get into trouble, right? So as a middle-aged woman who, I don't give a shit about abortion. I don't care. I don't care about any of that stuff. Why should I care? How many of you watching now are mad at me? Because you care, right? So if you're only going to look at a justice, how they rule on the specific narrow issues that you care about, but not an issue like Puerto Rico, or in Ruth Bader Ginsburg's case in 2005 when she sided with the state of New York against the tribal lands, and you don't care about any of that, when she actually wrote an opinion that sided with Manifest Destiny over the Constitution Title VI. If you're going to ignore that, then you are no better than somebody who says, why should I care about reproductive rights, right? So this is where it's all of us or none of us, and the divide and conquer is literally killing us through policy and law and everything else. Okay, so I want to bring that up. So there was Puerto Rico, and what was the other one here? Oh, what is Mitch doing? Okay, Mitch McConnell. So Mitch McConnell is the one who's going to bring about, he said initially he was not going to seat anybody, and during Obama's last term, his lame duck session, no, we are not going to suit anybody, but now he certainly is. And I just love this. This is from Aaron Nagler. So McConnell let a $3 trillion coronavirus relief bill sit on his desk for over 100 days, but it took an hour after the announcement of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing before releasing a statement vowing to hold a vote to replace her. So this is their priority, right? So what is it that they're actually trying to do? Whenever we look at actions, like here on this program, I am always going to stress, let's pay attention to what they do, not what they say, just like Claire McCaskill. So what is Mitch actually trying to do? What are the Republicans trying to do? And here again, it was on the SCOTUS blog. It's right there. So there was this wonderful interview about a gentleman who published a book, What We Learned. And his name, I think I'm going to pronounce it, his first name properly, Ilya Shapiro. And I don't know if he's any relation to Ben Shapiro, but Ben is famous for quoting Ilyan's book on his program. So Mr. Shapiro, Ilyan, the author, sits as a board member on the Cato Institute, C-A-T-O. Cato Institute, I guess, is now calling themselves a libertarian think tank. No, for decades they've been a conservative right-wing think tank. They work with ALEC, so they're like the policy consultants who inform Republican lawmakers, and ALEC actually writes the laws. So these two groups work part and parcel together. They work with the Heritage Fund, who also authored the ACA. So this group, this is Shapiro, wrote a book, and he was interviewed, and the transcript of that entire interview is on the SCOTUS blog. And in it, he's not trying to hide at all what they're trying to do. So this is where your federal judges, and then lastly your Supreme Court justices, come into play here. So let me pull up a little bit of what he said here. So this was about three quarters of the way down the first section of the transcript. So the question that was posed to Mr. Shapiro was, there's a notable element of legal realism in your book, especially in the chapter titled, What Have We Learned? All 7 lessons you set forth here suggest there is no way out of the politicization of judicial confirmation process. So here they're setting up 7 points to overcome your vote and in the Senate races so that they can get their federal judges into place. Right? So they're not necessarily worried about the Supreme Court. They're more worried about those federals. So here again, they put the Supreme Court up to distract you from what they're actually doing at the lower levels in the federal courts. So I would highly suggest you go and read those 7 lessons so that you can see exactly what the plan is. But Shapiro's response to that I thought was very telling, and the little red square, for those of you watching, that is my square, but because that is what I feel is the most important part of his response here. He says the Supreme Court really doesn't invalidate many laws, and the Roberts Court overturns precedents at a significantly lower rate than its predecessors. But it's absolutely appropriate for senators and voters to debate the theories that potential nominees would apply. So he's talking about that Senate piece on confirmation hearings. And he brought up a really good point. The Roberts Court, just like every other Supreme Court before, rarely overturns any prior ruling. So this again, your lower federal courts are more important. And how do you stop getting these right-wing people into federal courts? You vote for your Senate races, and you overturn somebody like a Tom Cotton. And you get good, rational people who can have a good debate and put people in there who are not going to legislate from the bench, right? So going back to those 7 principles, what are Republicans actually interested in doing? And Mr. Shapiro talked about it in that interview. It's something called, let me put his words up here right next to, is called the Constitutional Revolution of 1937. Is anybody at all familiar with there was a revolution in 1937. Do we know what it was?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this was after the Great Depression with the institution of the New Deal. This was Medicare, Social Security, and all the provisions. So the reason they call it a revolution of 1937 is because the Supreme Court and the courts below switched from a commerce focus to a civil rights focus. So what you're seeing right now with the Black Lives Matter and due process and equal protection and all of those things, they see as an outgrowth of this constitutional revolution of 1937. They also see the Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and all of these social programs that came out of the New Deal as an aberration of what the court is supposed to do. I don't know how to make that any more clear. That their entire goal is not necessarily to cancel marriage equality. It's not necessarily to cancel reproductive rights. They want the court to go back to the commerce portion and that focus of interstate trade and global trade and do away with some of those social safety nets. This is why you see their representatives talking about austerity programs, and you see them talking about we need to make cuts to Social Security and Medicare. You see them over and over and over doing that, and the way that they are trying to do that is to stack the court with these justices. Can I make that any more clear?
And let's be real about the reason, right? It's not about how they think that it's unfair or that it should be illegal. It's basically trying to eliminate these laws that get in the way of a purely capitalist, profit-driven society.
Yeah, that is exactly right. And I think that when you have these hot button issues like marriage equality and reproductive rights, that serves as a worthwhile distraction. I personally don't believe they care at all about those issues, but they use that, just like Lucy and the football, to get you to focus over here when you really should be looking at your Senate races and your state races. Because again, how do you change the law? It's not necessarily through the courts, because we saw here, and if you look in the SCOTUS blog, you can see the number of times the Roberts Court and every court preceding that has overturned something. And it is extraordinarily rare because they go by what the law says, what it is, not what it should be. So who
Right.
writes the law? Who writes it besides Alec? It's that's your state. That's your state and the person that you send to Congress. So this is why I keep saying over and over again, I do not care who you vote for at that presidential race. I do not care. What I care about is 156 progressives who won their primary, blood, sweat, and tears. And I cannot stress to you how hard it was and what most of them went through on a personal level to get there. The level of threats and everything that comes with it.
Especially in 2020, the year of the pandemic, right? Where
Yep.
they had to, nobody had any extra money. So they had to basically finance themselves for the most part in a time where most of them are running for the first time. They can't go door to door because of social distancing. And, you know, these people, these progressives that are running, although they may have got a little bit of name recognition, were hamstrung by the fact that the only way they could get the word out is by social media. So you have to be on social media to see them.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. Okay, real quick, I want to get to this. Lee brings up a really good point here. I hadn't considered this, but Lee says, as bad as losing the ACA would be, and it would be, one of the things the Dems have used as a weapon against progressives is the ACA. With the ACA gone, there would be no argument from the Dems against moving forward with universal health care. Interesting point, Lee. Yeah, my only cringe at that is how many people would have to die.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like, we know there's a problem. We know things have to change. How do we change it with as little loss of life as possible? Because right now the U.S. is in shambles.
Oh yeah,
People are starving,
and it's going to get worse. Absolutely,
of course it is. But do we make it a lot worse so that we can make it better faster? Is that loss of life worth the toll? Right? It's just it's a really hard decision, right? Like it was part of the argument that I got into in our own chat with someone about blowing the system up, because quite honestly, that might be the best way to make the changes we need to make.
Yeah.
But that's major hardship for most Americans, right?
Right, and one of the things that I've been talking to state organizers about, and I'm seriously considering doing this in the spring, because there's an election every year, not every 2 years or every 4 years, every year, is getting a ballot initiative, a state ballot initiative, and replicating this across the states, where the language specifies that if you are an elected official, either at a congressional level or a state level or a local level, you may not accept public funds to pay for your health insurance. So what that would do is members of Congress who right now get platinum level care that you and I cannot buy, they get that care and access to doctors and hospitals on our dime. And that is true for everyone in the state, everyone in Congress, everyone at your local level. If they have insurance available to them, it's paid for with public dollars. So
it's like they're Canadians.
Right? It's socialism for them. So what I am suggesting is that rather than pulling the rug out from everyone, let's just do it for members of Congress since they hate socialism so much. Let's relieve their burden of having their insurance taken from our dime. And while I recognize that most members of Congress are millionaires, and it probably wouldn't affect them all that much, what it would do would highlight the fact that we are paying for this out of our state taxes, in particular our property taxes. So if you own a house or a business or you're paying into the tax structure, that money is going towards socialistic health care for members of Congress in your state. And that should stop. So,
Well, it shouldn't necessarily stop. It should just be included to cover all Americans.
well, that's the point, right? So if we can't get them to be cooperative and do in all of us, then we're going to take the approach, none of us. So you don't get it on our dime either. I'll pay for my neighbor, but not you, Mr. and Mrs. Congressperson. So before we get out of here, I don't want to be total doom and gloom. There are 3 cases that I wanted to highlight that this one made me giggle. So this is your good news. Let me put this up here on the screen. There are not 1, not 2, but 3 cases before the Supreme Court on the emoluments clause against Mr. Trump, not President Trump, Mr. Trump serving in the White House.
And let's remember that it was Trump that had allowed most Americans to understand what the word emoluments actually meant.
Right, exactly. And what was interesting is the first case that came up was a partisan case. That was the Democratic Party brought that up, but these other two are really cool. So the first one is Trump versus the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. So this one is a group of businesses in DC and the surrounding Alexandria, Virginia area who have been negatively affected by Trump's mandate that all visitors to see him, whether military, diplomatic, or otherwise, must stay at a Trump property. Right? So they are saying we have been hurt by this and the president is enriching himself. That one I think is going to be extraordinarily promising because here you have business owners, corporations who are suing the president for violations of the emolument clause. Second one is Trump versus the District of Columbia. So this is another emolument one where the District of Columbia is pointing directly to the U.S. Constitution, the emoluments clause, and saying, no, you cannot do this. You are enriching ourselves. And we have proof that the Trump family and the Trump holdings have been enriched by all of this. And in fact, I was reading this article last week about his golf course in Scotland and how they're quite literally raping Scotland for money here. And like when we would take a U.S. jet, like a big one, a C2, and reroute them to land in Scotland and make all of our service personnel stay overnight at the Trump Resort and golf place there, that's millions wasted, and it keeps happening over and over and over again. Well, same thing's happening here in the U.S. So those 3 cases are making their way to the Supreme Court, sitting there waiting. So this is what we expect in October to be read in and the oral arguments made. So that would be super exciting. Because what's going to happen is if the Supreme Court decides to take that up and rule on it, that could either be a judgment against the sitting president or just a guy who was president, depending on how the election goes. So there's a happy thought.
Well, and the other thing it does is it sets a direction for an impeachment, right? You're not going to give that decision to Nancy Pelosi and say, oh, well, he went after Joe's son. One of ours.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So that would be interesting. Super, super interesting. So that's about all I got. There's one comment coming in here from Noble. Noble says more strikes by the sports teams as a way to make these demands might be swifter. You know what? You know what, Noble? I just had this argument with my son, and he got really defensive because he was talking about LeBron. And when LeBron led the NBA players to strike, and what were they? It was like 24 hours. They were already back to playing. And my son got really defensive because he loves LeBron. He's like, what do you want this 24-year-old basketball player to do? He already got voting at all the stadiums, and he's already done more as a basketball player than Congress people. Well, my son was right. The point that I made to him was, well, they didn't hold out very long, right? And I can't really fault the millionaires playing NBA when we ourselves, we can't organize a general strike to save our lives. So not even
I
for
believe
NBA.
that was a maybe 1.5 day sit down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it
Yeah.
made enough headlines when you have the networks queued up to watch a playoff, and the players decide we're not going to do it. So I will
Right,
give them credit, but
And the other thing is, like, I mean, I don't know if you saw it, but just recently at one of the football games, the two teams came together and locked arms in a show of solidarity.
mm-hmm.
Right? There was no anthem playing. It was just, we're going to lock arms. So it was just display that massive amounts of booing fans ringing down from the stands. Do you remember that? Did you remember that story?
Yeah.
This was not protesting against the anthem and all the bullshit that happened that Trump was all pushing. This was just a show of solidarity between two teams. So apparently in Trump's America, that's not allowed either.
Right. I keep trying to make the argument that, okay, so let me back up. My girlfriend and I took a bucket list trip to the UK in Ireland and Scotland, and on the way over there, this was 2-3 years ago, on the way over there, we were like, let's tell everyone we're Canadian, because we were embarrassed. And what was so funny is it was kind of a standing joke, but we got to one portion of our tour where we had to take a really big bus to, I think it was, I don't know. And so we were on a big tour bus, and there were other families getting on, and there were no seats for this couple and their child to sit together by the time they had got on. So my girlfriend got up and moved 3 rows back, and they were like, "Oh, thank you so much." And when we spoke perfect English, they went, "Oh, you must be Canadian because you're so nice." And we both looked at each other, and we went, no, we're American. And the shock on their face, because we had done something selfless, something nice, and we were polite, and oh my God, we're Americans. They were looking at us like we had 3 heads. So there are still nice people in the United States, and I would even wager that most of the super angry MAGA people face to face, they're not like that. They would never do it.
I think that, and I've actually heard this commentated on in a number of different sources outside of the U.S. It's almost like the Americans have lost their sense of society, sense of community, right? That they're so tribalized politically, racially, that you have to be in fear of everyone. You have to be suspicious of everyone. Who's packing a gun? Who isn't? That this thing that occurs naturally in most societies. And still, I'm sure to a large degree in the US, depending on where you're from and what's going on, has been lost. That there's no longer the sense of thinking in terms of what's better for all of us instead of what's better for me. And I've had those conversations with people online or wherever. You know, I'm good. Who cares about everybody else? My husband has good health care through his work. So we don't care.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
like that's scary as hell.
Well, that is exactly where we started this conversation today. Nice roundup, Andy. But
Well, thank you.
that's where we started the conversation today. If you're looking at a figure like Ruth Bader Ginsburg as a champion of social justice because she was really good on these narrow issues, and you forget where she herself was very critical of Colin Kaepernick until she was called out on it. And all of her rulings that sided with fracking and commerce and any of the justices, actually. So there was one quote here before we get out of here. Andy, we're going to play Who Said It. So I don't know if you know who all nine justices were, 8 now. But on that Ramos case, there was a case here, and it's out on the SCOTUS blog, where there are 2 states in the entire U.S. Union where you can be convicted of a serious crime on a 10-2. Every other state requires that it must be unanimous. So if 12 jurors don't vote in the same way to convict you, it's a mistrial and you have to start over again. There are 2 states. The 2 states are Louisiana and Oregon. And in this case that the Supreme Court heard, Ramos, this gentleman who I don't remember what he was accused of doing, but he was convicted on a 10-2 in the state of Louisiana. And his argument was, in any other state, they would adhere to the 14th and the 6th Amendment, and that it must be unanimous because that's what the Constitution says. Oregon and Louisiana say differently, so it went to the Supreme Court. So the majority of the justices sided with the state of Louisiana against Mr. Ramos. There was one who wrote the dissenting opinion, and here it is. So for those of you who are just listening, this dissenting opinion, in quotes, this section says, Ramos's felony conviction by a non-unanimous jury is unconstitutional because the 6th Amendment's protection against non-unanimous felony guilty verdicts applies against the state through the Privilege or Immunities Clause of the 14th Amendment, not the Due Process Clause. So this justice wrote the dissenting opinion saying that Ramos is right under the 6th Amendment against non-unanimous guilty verdicts. Who wrote that opinion?
Okay, give me a bit of a timeline first.
This was, hold on, I think I still have it on my desktop here. And I do not, oh wait, yeah, I do. This was a decision April 20th, 2020. So this year, just a few months ago.
I would say then, Judge Neil Gorsuch.
Ooh, you are close. This was actually Justice Thomas.
Ooh.
Thomas was the one who wrote the dissenting opinion, and Thomas was the one who sided for Mr. Ramos. Ruth Bader did not. None of the liberal justices sided with the gentleman in question here. So,
not even Justice Beerbaum?
No. So I think it just goes to show that people are fallible. Our expectations and mindset about who a person is does not always reflect the reality. Like I never would have thought Thomas would have ruled that way. So my apologies to Justice Thomas.
Well, and the other thing, and I was going to bring up, but we're still talking about it, so I'm going to bring it up now.
Okay.
You can see in the process of the other two justices that Trump has appointed, right? That, oh my God, he's conservative. Oh, there goes Roe v. Wade. Oh, there goes everything else we all hold dear, which is Gorsuch and Beardpaw. And so you look now at the decisions and the way that they've voted and done that, and you look at, they are not nearly as horrible as the Democratic politicians and the centrist apologists all said they were. All of the pearl clutching that came from, oh my goodness, that's it for our values and the country, and it's over. You know.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And Kavanaugh himself has ruled against Trump already. So this is where you've got to really, let's be adults about it. And you're right, Andy, we're way too tribal. So if you want to change the landscape of a nation, you change the law. And that is why your vote matters. The people you
or
vote
you nuke
in.
it.
No! No!
That changes the landscape completely.
Yeah, well, it does, but oh my God, are you still Canadian? What was that? That was crazy. Okay, so now we're totally off the rails now, but so the overarching point here that we've gotten around to in this hour is you gotta vote. And if you are not happy with the top of the ticket, the presidential choices, I get it. Fine. Everybody down ballot, you got to vote for, please. Please.
Yes, and it's called a Google machine, and you can find out who's running in the races that are really important.
Yep. Especially
right? The down ballot candidates, the potential candidates that will, if win, move up through the political system. Right? That will eventually, you could conceivably vote for a president down the road.
Right, especially your local, your county judges, your county state's attorney, those are critical. So if you don't know who those people are, and most people don't, go to their website or hit them up on Facebook or call their offices. Hey, why should I vote for you? Yeah, you owe it to yourself to do that, because all of these justices that are in line for the Supreme Court, they started somewhere, right? Even Trump's sister she got her appointment to the federal court through her brother, but she started as an elected judge too. So, yeah. So everybody, please go vote. And that's it. All right. So we'll be back here on Wednesday, and I have no idea what we're talking about. And if you notice behind me, the collection of boxes, I'm moving. So there's personal chaos. So maybe not as organized as I could be, but yeah, that's what Andy's for. So.
Well, I've noticed that since you've put boxes in the background, your lighting has gotten a lot better.
Has it really?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for that. All right, so we'll get out of here. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you back here Wednesday.
Take care.
Never thought we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Never the dog, we keeping it G. Whoa.